All right, everyone. Venezuela's misery is now being compounded over time by something else, which is the migration of people out of Venezuela who don't have any access to food, jobs, and are basically living in such abject conditions that it doesn't matter if you're risking passing out by the wayside or getting shot by a Brazilian or Colombian soldier. It doesn't matter if you're attacked by a socialist guerrilla before you can get to the border or something, because you don't really have anything to preserve. If you don't migrate, you're probably going to die anyway. You'll wither away, die of a communicable disease, you'll starve to death, somebody will kill you in order to take the bag of rice that the government just gave you to survive on for the next month. I did a little calculation here. At the current apparently projected rate of people moving out of Venezuela, they will lose almost 2 million people off their population in this year, mostly to northern Brazil or to Colombia. That is a substantial proportion of the Venezuelan population. The problem is when you have that kind of an economy, which is, it's basically collapsed anyway. When you have an economy that relies upon, basically the value of your labor. Outside of oil, that would be the only thing you would have, is basically localized farming anyway. When you're losing that proportion of your population every single year or any span of time, that's a substantial proportion of your economy. What little is left of it then gets vampirized even further, and then you get other problems. At some point, because Brazil and Colombia don't appear to want to turn people away. They're like, well, otherwise these people will die. It's not going to look good on the world stage. At some point, they are going to demand the ability to intervene directly in Venezuela, which makes sense. Now, they'll probably want the U.S. to get involved, too. That would be a terrible idea. It would probably cause the immediate activation of chaos in the streets of Caracas as people say, oh, the great Satan is coming to steal our oil and enslave us and butcher our children, basically similar to like North Korean propaganda. I think it wouldn't go over so well. But if Brazilian and Colombian troops ever storm the border, it's not like Maduro's people could fight back at this point. Half of them probably wouldn't bother. It'd be a little bit like a Saddam's elite corps situation where half of them just say fuck it and wander off because they don't want to get killed. That could happen. And it is good. There's a little bit of a difference, by the way. This is technically similar to maybe the Syrian, refugee, migrant crisis, because most of those people aren't Syrian anyway, they're from other parts of the world. But there is a little bit of a difference here. Number one, you can sort of vouch for where people are coming from. It's more documented and documentable despite the flow of people. Number two, there's a similarity in culture. I realize, by the way, people need to understand Brazil. They speak Portuguese, not Spanish. There's a little bit of a difference culturally speaking, but there is a similarity too. It's, there is some overlap. They share a physical border. It's not like someone wandering in from a different continent. They're all in South America anyway. So there is some similarity. There is some bond. So it's maybe, more peaceful, but they're beginning to get worried, I guess, in Brazil about the proliferation of drugs, smuggling, and stuff like that. I would be worried about prostitution, certainly. People literally, they're like, well, I don't have a job, I don't have any food. I'm just going to sell my body, because fuck it, basically. So it's like there's nothing else. What else are you going to do? Hire yourself out as a hitman. That's probably the only other thing you can do. You probably get more for that if you partnered with Maduro, like you're a hardcore socialist. You're like, oh, please pay me. I'll kill some of these protesters in the alley when they disperse. It's basically, well, as long as I can eat the bodies, it tastes like pepper spray, but that's okay. That's basically the sort of weird shit that goes on at this point in Venezuela. There is no economy. Now, Maduro, he's moved on to the next phase of his, crypto overhaul, and they've banned a bunch of exchanges in Venezuela, so things are getting worse. Like, there are Venezuelans, apparently, on what electricity they have, they play RuneScape 20 hours a day, and then they sell RuneScape items and fucking bonds and stuff, because that $4.99 you can get for a RuneScape bond is actually quite valuable in Venezuela and will buy your food for the week. So there are Venezuelans that just sit there and play online games. It's the only way they can make money. It's essentially at the point where you've got a Rwanda situation there. It's insane. I can't imagine. There are certain classes of people, certain maybe upper class individuals, maybe within the socialist movement itself in certain parts of Venezuela that can get by. For 99% of the population, it's apparently abject misery, and this speaks volumes. The movement of people is a better measure of misery, maybe, than many, like you'd expect. Let's say that the World Socialist website is right and, oh, things are fine in Venezuela. Okay, well then why are 5,000 people exiting the country on a daily basis? Why is it that you have tent cities springing up near the border on the Colombian and Brazilian sides of this country? It wouldn't make any sense. If it were actually going fine, now there weren't any problems in Venezuela and the whole thing was blown out of proportion, you would not expect that massive amount of people to be leaving. You're talking about the population of a significant sized city every month, a significant metropolitan area. That will eventually drain the Venezuelan economy. I can't imagine that many people are trying to give birth at this point, and if they are, they're probably leaving Venezuela as a ratio at much higher numbers to get childcare specifically. They're like, oh, well, and yeah, it might still be, not great care, but it's better than what I'm going to get here in Venezuela. I'll be giving birth, there won't be anesthetic, there won't be any sanitation, and my doctor will actually be like a bus driver or something because the real doctor left to go to Colombia. And there are apparently people in the white-collar trades, because nobody can afford their services, have gotten to the point where a lot of them prostitute themselves. A lot of them end up doing, like, apparently, there's a story about them mixing drinks in the most literal sense. Oh yeah, working at night in the bar, it's like more lucrative than being a dentist. Nobody can afford dentistry. Who's gonna, I get this, decent degree. Socialism does, potentially create a good infrastructure for at least the academic side of medicine, very much so. But then nobody can afford the service, so it becomes worthless. Oh yeah, I got a Cuban education. It's like for general medicine, pretty damn good, and for certain specialized things too. But nobody, they gave me an abalone in order to obtain their visit today. Next time it will be a sack of rice, some maize, and that's basically how socialism devolves. It's how it dies. Cuba right now is moving kind of in the other direction, beginning to modernize, which there will be something lost, like those old vintage cars that are barely holding together. They are quite nice, the old scarified cityscapes that look like they're straight out of the 1940s. Okay, there's something to be said for that sort of appeal, but in Venezuela, not working so well. The problem is, this is what we have to understand. A lot of people just blame Maduro. So Maduro destroyed the country. No, Chavez did. Chavez began this problem years and years before Maduro takes hold because he created a monocultured economy entirely reliant upon one export, and that's crude oil. 80% of the economy in one thing that declined by more than 50% in value, that's a large chunk of your economy that goes bye-bye. Now they can't even pump the oil. It's not even worth enough for them to pump it in many cases. Those rigs only work part-time. OPEC refuses to ease up. If they did ease up so the oil prices rose, U.S. firms would begin extracting more and they'd get shoved back under. Because there's no efficiency involved. Apparently those rigs leak all the time. They're poorly maintained anyway. Even during the best of times, they weren't at peak efficiency. So Venezuela is now losing significant proportions of its population on a regular basis. Eventually, the Brazilians and or Colombians and or someone else is going to want to intervene directly. They're going to say, okay, we can only take so many people. We're going to go in and we're going to beat Maduro's head in and establish a new government that hopefully can stabilize the situation, because it's not going to work for us anymore. What else are you going to do? Shoot 5,000 people a day that try to cross over your border? You think that the migration into the United States is a problem. Now look at what's happening with Brazil, and Brazil, of course, doesn't have a first world economy to cope with such a thing. It doesn't have the extra land to settle all of these individuals. And then you've got this trickle of people into other countries. I'm sure they don't all stay in Brazil. Some of them probably move elsewhere. Same with Colombia. Some probably try to make the journey all across Central America up here. A little bit difficult to go that distance. Cross over into an entirely new continent. It's not the same as someone who's living in northern Mexico in view of the non-wall border. It's a little bit different. But hopefully something can be done, because when you have this kind of movement of people, it is now clear it is a humanitarian crisis. Again, I totally oppose any military maneuvering by the U.S. We shouldn't be any directly involved. We shouldn't even directly back anyone that does get involved, but we should put pressure on, I believe it's called the OAS, the states down there in general. Do something about Maduro. He's an illegitimate dictator at this point anyway. Some people are talking about how he's might be drawing up a secret second constitution to replace the first. It's obvious the courts won't restrain him. The legislature can't restrain him. The military hasn't so far defected, although I'm still surprised that no soldier has just popped off and shot his brains out. I'm still surprised that no patriotic citizen in Venezuela has taken a shot at Maduro. Honestly, even construct a bow and just put a poison arrow between his eyes or something. Probably be the best thing for the rest of the population. Yeah, you'd be a martyr at that. Yeah, you'd probably get killed, but probably save a million lives. That's about all. Peace out.